Welcome. Tonight we fall backward into a quieter obsession, one ink stroke at a time. You're lying down now, maybe as your mind pads softly into the Ottoman Empire, not through war drums or palace intrigue, but through rustling pages and pedals pressed flat against parchment. Somewhere, incense curls in the stale air of an archive, and you're standing in the middle of it, eyes adjusting, spine cracking, wondering how in the world you've ended up here. You re-surrounded by rows of scrolls fragile and yellowed, each one murmuring with the same delicate truth. Tulips. Descriptions of them, paintings of them, measurements, names, prices, metaphors. It's a floral bureaucracy so intense, you probably won't survive this without picking up a mild case of garden-induced madness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're re-listening from. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake with ink on your fingers. You're sitting upright in a too-small chair, and the archival room around you has gone hushed and strange. The smell of paper-aged, floral dusty is now overpowering. You realize the inkwell beside you is dried into a soft black crust. Somehow, you're dressed not in your clothes but in layered robes of fine cotton and gold-trimmed wool. Ottoman, definitely. The room around you, which was once a modern research hall, has transformed into a long, stone-walled chamber filled with pigeonhole shelves, scrolls, and bound ledgers. And in the very center of it all, a man-shaped shadow watching you from across the room. Thin, calm, smiling faintly. Back to work, he whispers, and then vanishes. That's how it begins. In this version of Istanbul, the year is something like 1711, but you stopped asking after the third cup of bitter coffee and the 1000th tulip entry. You are, apparently, a low-ranking scribe in the Lolly Defteri. You don't handle war, you don't negotiate treaties. You document flowers. It's less relaxing than it sounds. This office is its own little world, and the man who made it so is still remembered in soft tones, the Ottoman bureaucrat, who spent over 40 years cataloguing tulips. You are in his place now. You are, for all intents and absurd purposes, him, your first job. Writing about a bloom called Night's Breath. It's purple, no violet with black seams. It was last seen blooming in the northern gardens of Topkapi Palace, though that was before the gardener had an unfortunate incident involving a jealous vizier in an ill-placed wheelbarrow. You dip your brush in the ink and begin to write. You describe the curvature of the petals, compare its scent to smoked plums, and give it a melancholy rating of 3. The next scroll is worse. It's written entirely in classical Persian poetry and annotated in Ottoman Turkish, with occasional insults in Arabic that your handwriting must not resemble. There's a drawing of a tulip with one tear-shaped petal, and next to it, a node. This one made the lady faint. Historians still argue whether that was metaphor or medical emergence. You work through the night. Your fingers are Occasionally, a petal floats down from nowhere and lands in your lap. You don't ask questions. You just catalog it. Outside the window, you hear bells ringing softly. The city sleeps. The muezzin won't call dawn prayer for hours yet, but the moonlight picks out the gilding on your ink knife, and suddenly it hits you, this man, the one whose life you now wear like a slightly oversized coat, lived like this for decades. Quietly, faithfully, inhale, write, observe, describe, fold the flower into words, and for what? Recognition, wealth? Certainly not. He did it for love, not for a woman, or a man, or even a sultan, though he served several. He loved the tulip itself, its curve, its defiance, its fickle way of blooming and withering. There is something to be said for devoting your life to a thing that neither notices you nor cares, and yet you do it. You've now catalogued 247 varieties. The archivist S notes left behind show he reached over 1,300 by the time he could no longer hold the brush. Sometimes, the categories feel absurd. One section is simply called tulips that look like they're gossiping. Another, appropriate blooms for executions, which you try not to dwell on too long. Still, it's oddly calming work. Meditative. You forget where you end and the petals begin. A mainstream fact, then, the tulip era of the Ottoman Empire, roughly 1718 to 1730, was marked by peace, diplomacy, and a flourishing of the arts. Tulips became not just decoration, but political language. Entire fortunes were spent importing new bulbs, breeding rare colors, and inventing floriculture systems with dizzying names. Tulip stood in for prestige, beauty, and dangerously inflated economic speculation. But a fringe tidbit. Well, one rumor that drifts through the archive is that Sultan Ahmed III once held a private midnight competition to judge tulip-scented oils. The bureaucrat dutifully recorded the results on silk parchment, soaked with the winning perfume. You find a copy, you sneeze violently, and yet the deeper you go, the stranger things get. You begin to suspect the archivist didn't just record tulips, he communed with them. Certain entries seem less descriptive and more devotional. One scroll ends with, "This flower has forgiven me." No explanation. You stop sleeping. Not because you're tired, but because sleep feels unnecessary. The tulips speak to you now, in pigment and whisper. You begin writing poetry in the margins of the ledgers, rhymed lists of bloom dates, acrostics shaped like petals. You're not sure if this is madness or just what devotion looks like in Ottoman ink. Outside, the Bosphorus glimmers. Inside, a flower presses softly against the window glass. You don't look up. You're right, you've just finished cataloging the velvet sunset tulip when your ink knife goes missing. Again, you check under the table. You find it, an hour later, stabbed into the spine of a rival scribe's scroll. A warning, maybe, or a joke, or just bureaucracy. One last joke before sleep finds you tonight. The tulip with the longest name in your registry. My heart exploded in your presence, O gilded swan of the perfumed meadow. It's listed under M. You keep writing. You're late, again, this time. You're being summoned not by inked directives or folded parchment slips, but by the sharp, unmistakable shuffle of leather-soled slippers echoing down the corridor. One of the junior scribes, the one who smells permanently of cardamom and anxia sticks, his head into your alcove and hisses, "The Council of Petals is assembling." And you're not there. You sigh, not because you're surprised, but because this happens every third day and no one ever tells you what the council actually does. Still, you rise, straighten your robe, and tuck a dried bloom behind your ear. It's regulation, sort of. And besides, it hides the ink smudge you got from accidentally falling asleep on a blueprint of tulip bed layouts. The corridor winds like a lazy riverstone walls, lined with latticed windows and half-shuttered candle niches. You pass other bureaucrats on your way to the chamber. Some nod, others scowl. One whispers, "Pedal-counting fool," but you let it slide. He still hasn't recovered from the yellow incident of 27. You remember. 5 identical tulips, 5 different classifications, and a shouting match that nearly broke a porcelain vase. The council room is already full when you arrive. Everyone's seated in a crescent formation, robes puffed like sleepy pigeons. At the center of the room sits the high registrar. He's mostly beard and rings, a man whose eyes never blink at the same time. In front of him, scrolls, wax, seals, a very tiny garden of potted tulips, arranged in what can only be described as an emotional hierarchy. The most joyful blooms get center stage. The sullen ones sulk near the ink. A clerk begins reading the minutes. It's a slow, rhythmic drone. Pedaled curvature deviations. Page 7. Complaint from Vizier Hazen about the scent of catalogued specimen number 108. Proposed renaming of Whispering Peach to Peach that does not whisper at all. You blink. This is your life now. Mainstream history tells us that Ottoman court culture in the early 18th century prized refinement. This was a world of elaborate etiquette, controlled extravagance, and a bureaucracy so intricate it once issued an edict on the proper distance between calligraphy lines. Within that tangle of administration, a peculiar corner flourished: tulip cataloging. Not gardening, not breeding, cataloging. And here you are, elbow deep in its most sacred rite. The High Registrar clears his throat a noise like someone trying to swallow a bagpipe and motions for the discussion to begin. Today's agenda, the crisis of scent classification. Apparently, a batch of golden glimmers recently failed its fragrance inspection. The petals are correct. The color, flawless. But the smell, one council member says it evokes aged butter, another swears it's like burnt cinnamon. You're asked your opinion, you lean forward, inhale dramatically, and declare, it smells like unspoken disappointment. A few nods. One clerk faints. A fringe tidbit for you. Some Ottoman bureaucrats developed such a refined tulip vocabulary that their descriptions were closer to music than botany. Terms like sapphire and Cataloguing weren't just poetic, they were indexing categories. You once spent 3 days arguing whether a tulip silhouette resembled an earring or a minaret. You lost and you still think they were both wrong. Back in the chamber, the debate shifts. Now it's about classification symbols. There's a push to add a new glyph. A small crescent indicate evokes personal memories. Some worry it's too subjective. Others argue that every tulip already does this and therefore the symbol is redundant. The discussion spirals. Someone slams a scroll. You're doodling tiny tulips on your cuff. Suddenly, the chamber falls silent. The High Registrar is staring at you. You, archivist, he says slowly. How many pages in the Night Garden ledger are missing their morning annotations? You freeze. There it is, your cardinal sign. You forgot whilst you log sunrise bloom behavior in one of the ledgers. That means 2 entire entries may have been recorded with evening colors instead of morning hues. In most careers, this would be minor here. It's a disaster akin to putting jam on the current. You stammer. Apologize. Offer to redo the entries. Someone gasps. The High Registrar nods gravely. See that you do, he murmurs, or your ink will dry. Permanently. Was that a threat? A metaphor? A scheduling reminder? Hard to say. The meeting lurches on. By the time it's over, you've promised to write a new entry on a tulip called Murmur in the Rain, help mediate a petal texture dispute, and recopy all 87 variants of the submissive sunrise category. You also volunteer foolishly to join the upcoming bloom. A bloom walk is like a courtly audit. You and 3 other scribes are sent into the royal gardens with magnifying glasses, tapestries, and a picnic basket. Your job is to verify that the tulips outside match the registry within. If they don't, you update the record. If they do, you write a short poem about it. You once spent 5 hours composing a sonnet to a flower that turned out to be a cleverly disguised onion. Historians still argue whether that was bureaucratic error or a prank by the palace cooks. By the end of the day, your fingers are stained with 4 shades of ink and your sleeves smell faintly of rosewater and paper mold. You retreat to your alcove, slide behind your desk, and unroll the Night Garden ledger. There's a petal pressed between 2 pages. It wasn't there this morning. It's small, slightly withered, striped with burgundy and pale gold. You squint. You flip to the appendix. There's no match. You whisper a new one and begin to write. Outside, dusk settles over the mosque's dim. Lanterns flicker. And, somewhere in the palace, someone hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like your tulip sonnet from last spring. One last joke before you sleep. The new intern thinks hybridization means tulips that get along with everyone. You let him keep thinking that. He's got 3 weeks before the pollen wars begin. The bloom walk begins before sunrise. You're awake while the call to prayer is still echoing through the alleys of The sound soft and elastic in the cool. You pull on your robe crisp and slightly ink-stiffened. Authority and deeply repressed panic. Your satchel is already packed. 2 scrolls, 3 brushes, an ink, and the official tulip inspector's lens, which is, in practice, a cracked magnifying glass, tied with silk ribbon and blessed during a suspiciously wine-heavy ceremony last winter. You meet the others at the northeast gate of the Topkapi Gardens. There's Yusufolda perpetually squinting, smells like pickled garlic. Fatma sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous in a debate. And Litasem, the newest apprentice, who wears his robe like he's still growing into it, which he is. He carries the basket. He also brought apricots. The gates creak open, and the garden breathes. It exhales a scent so layered you could write a 4-volume epic about it. Damp earth, old stone, blossoms, opening like whispered secrets. The tulips, asleep in the dark, stand straight like noblemen waiting to be acknowledged. You whisper your greetings to them. Fatma rolls her eyes. Sem bows. You begin with a lover's crescent, but allegedly the oldest in the Sultaness private collection. These tulips are curved, pale, and always seem to be leaning toward each other conspiratorially. Your job: check the current colors, note, stem, angle, record any signs of blight, and recite the catalogued poem associated with each variant. Yes, each variant has a poem. You kneel beside the first. Dream of the eunuch, a tragic little thing with dusky pink petals and a tendency to bloom out of sync with the others. The registry says its poem should be a 3-line lament. Sem volunteers to recite. He gets through 2 lines before bursting into tears. You make a note. Emotional accuracy confirmed. Mainstream historians usually frame the tulip era as a period of elite indulgence, architectural flourish, and symbolic. This was a time when tulip-themed calligraphy was gifted between foreign dignitaries, and parties were thrown not to view the flowers, but to bask in their potential. Some blooms hadn't even opened yet. Didn't matter. Invitations were printed anyway. But here, in the dirt, the bureaucracy is far more intimate, quiet. You're not performing for the court. You're measuring petals to confirm whether a flower still qualifies as modestly immodest. That's an actual category. You're still unsure what it means. A fringe tidbit. One document you carry outlines a failed experiment in tulip musical therapy. A physician-turned-botanist theorized that playing different instruments near bulbs would alter their blooming patterns. It would made them mellow, rabab, made them twitch. The drum, wilting. The tulips allegedly preferred flute, though some scholars argue that correlation does not imply causation and that the flute player was just very attractive. You're halfway through the inspection when disaster strikes. Yusuf wobbling slightly from lack of breakfast trips over a route and crashes directly into the moon's regret bed. Tulips go flying. Sem screams. Fatma drops her brush and immediately begins administering triage, whispering to each crushed bloom like a battlefield medic. You kneel, too, heart pounding. This is worse than misfiling of Azir's favorite variety. You check your scrolls. 6 out of 10 in this section are now, let's say, artistically compromised. The registry says to refer to Protocol G11. Floral emergency. It involves careful replanting, temporary reclassification, and mandatory poetry of apology. You draw your breath. You're right. Forgive the hand that tripped upon your grace. Our steps are mortal, but you bloom again. Fatma approves. Sem sniffs. Yusuf apologizes profusely to the soil. By mid-morning, the sun warms the marble paths and brings the tulips fully into bloom. The garden glows. Not metaphorically, you swear some of these colors weren't visible before. There's one striped bloom that wasn't in the catalogue at all. You point it out. Fatma leans in. That's the diplomat's lie, she says. It hasn't bloomed in 12 years. Historians still argue whether that tulip's name refers to an actual political scandal or was just the result of a joke gone too far among the royal gardeners. The truth has wilted with the generations. You sketch the flower, list its hue. Silver blood red with truth, fatigue. Add your initials. Sem draws a tiny, angry face in the corner. You pretend not to see it. By noon, the inspection is complete. Your satchel is heavier now, stuffed with corrections, revisions, and 2 petals you're fairly certain are illegal hybrids. You've also eaten all of Sem's He forgives you. Eventually, back in the archive, you lay out the new data. Update 5 entries. Add a poem. Remove a duplicate entry involving sweet blush number 7, which was just sweet blush number 4 in better lighting. And then perhaps inevitably there's a knock. A page boy. Tiny hat. Big panic energy. You're summoned, he says. Urgent. You follow him through twisting halls to a chamber you've never seen before. It's round, lined with velvet panels. 1 chair, 1 desk, and a tulip in a glass dome. The High Registrar sits there, fingers steep. We've found an unregistered bloom in the royal greenhouse, he says. It's not in any record. Not even yours. You stiffen. He slides a painting toward you. Newly done. The tulip is wrong. Its petals are star-shaped. It gleams like lacquered wood. The color is pure shadow with veins of green gold. No name, no poem, no precedent. You'll go tomorrow, he says. Bring your best ink. You nod. You leave. And for the rest of the day, you can't shake the feeling that something old, something vast, has opened its eye. A final joke before rest claims you. Sem insists he saw 1 tulip blink at him during the bloom walk. No one believes him, except you, because once 3 springs ago you also saw a tulip blink. It winked. Morning comes in through the shutters like a polite not because your mattress is lumpy or because your room smells faintly of boiled parchment, but because that tulip painting won't leave you alone. The star-shaped bloom with lacquer-sheen petals, the shade of darkness that seemed to shimmer like fish scales in moonlight. You turned it over in your mind all night, like a coin you can't spend. Now, with a stiff spine and an extra splash of rose water behind your ears, you step into the corridor. You carry your special satchel, not the daily one, but the rare event satchel. The one reserved for taxonomic emergencies and tea ceremonies involving foreign botanists. Inside it, your finest brush, your last unopened inkstone. The royal greenhouse lies deep within the palace grounds. hidden behind a maze of trellises and walls covered in climbing jasmine. You're escorted by 2 guards not because of danger, but because too many scribes have gotten lost among the herbariums and ended up napping beside the camellias. You arrive. The greenhouse is warm and humid, its glass dome catching the morning sun like a magnifying tear. Inside, the air is thick with chlorophyll, bees, and suspicion. This is not your usual field of study. You're a catalog man, a poet, a bureaucrat of the bloom. But today, you are also an investigator. Waiting inside is Rookie Hatton, the royal greenhouse keeper, elderly, sharp-tongued, and rumored to once have seduced a Dutch horticulturalist just to steal his pruning technique. She greets you with a nod that implies both annoyance and restrained admiration. You're late, she says. You're not, but you're not anyway. She leads you to the far corner of the greenhouse, where a small velvet rope cordons off a single planter. And there it is, the tulip, worse or better than the painting. It pulses with color. The petals look drier, yet somehow waxen. Its stem is darker than regulation allows. The base, streaked with ivory, and the scent, like rain-soaked parchment in the back of your grandmother's wardrobe. Memory, dust, regret. You stare. Mainstream history tells us that the Ottoman fascination with tulips bordered on obsession. Entire fortunes were made and lost on bulbs. A single flower could elevate a gardener to courtly status or lead to exile if it wilted on the wrong day. But this ... this is something else. This tulip doesn't fit. It doesn't echo the classical style. It doesn't resemble any cultivar from Edon to Bukhara. You take out your brush, dip it into the ink, and pause. How old is this bloom, you ask? Rookie shrugs. It bloomed last night. No one planted it. Fringe detail. There's an Ottoman ghost story about a tulip that grows wherever forbidden knowledge is buried. It first appeared in a satirical manuscript by a mad calligrapher, later suppressed by the Bureau of Scribal Decency. He called it Loliai Mekahel, the unknown tulip. According to legend, it blooms only when the empire is asking a question it fears the answer to. You record the petal shape, measure it, note the subtle asymmetry. When you press a scroll near it, the ink on the page seems to ripple just slightly. You blink hard, Rookie, you whisper. Has this plant been? Responding. She narrows her eyes. I haven't said anything to it. You nod, but you both understand that doesn't answer the question. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman tulip craze was driven by aesthetics, politics, or something subtler, an attempt to pin beauty to rules, to tame chaos with petals. Your job, your whole career, has been a slow ballet of control. This flower is not dancing with you, it's leading. You do the only thing that feels honest. You write a new entry. You don't name the tulip. You draw it. You describe the color as midnight peeled with envy. You list the scent as archival sorrow. You leave the poem section blank. You simply don't dare. Back at the archive, you lay the scroll in a separate drawer, away from the others. You wrap it in silk. You place a pebble on top. Why? You don't know. It just feels respectful. And then you draft a short letter to the hierarchy. You keep it vague. Specimen confirmed. No known precedent. Classification pending further bloom cycles. Caution advised. You seal it with your personal stamp, an ink blot vaguely shaped like a tulip. Accidentally created during your apprenticeship and now oddly revered. You close the drawer. Just as you're turning to leave, you see something strange. A shadow under your desk. It wasn't there before. Read spool. It's a petal. Dark. Thin. Faintly veined. With gold. You never brought one back from the greenhouse, and no one else has been in your alcove. A soft draft moves the lampshade. The ink in your part trembles. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're afraid. No. You're a bureaucrat. You fear deadlines, not ghosts. No. You stay awake cataloging everything. Every flicker. Every twitch of color, every whisper from the back of your mind that suggests this flower knows more than you do. Final joke before rest. Sem, the apprentice, thinks the new bloom might be a sign from a lost empire. You ask him, which empire? He says, the one that comes after us. You laugh. Then you stop laughing. You start the day by rewriting everything, not just the report on the unknown tulip. You revise your entire classification system. Gone are notably coy and melancholy, but now you add a new category, potentially aware. You don't tell anyone what that means. You just mark the column with a discreet red dot, like a warning sign for future catalogers. Or perhaps a secret nod to your more superstitious self. Then comes the real labor, catching up on backlog. You return to the stack of petitions submitted by nobles, merchants, and occasionally bored clergy, all begging for their favorite tulip to be featured in the official Imperial Tulip Codex. Volume She. It's become a sort of backdoor to prestige. If your family's flower gets mentioned even once, even briefly, you suddenly have proof that your bloodline blooms with taste. Today's most desperate request comes from a pasha in Konya, who insists his grandmother's hybrid tulip, the blushing justice, once made the Sultan weep. He even includes a small watercolor illustration, a pink bloom, slightly crooked, with tear marks on the paper. You gently file it under eminently This is the part of your work most people never see: the negotiations. The power plays hidden in petals. Because in the Ottoman Empire, a tulip isn't just a flower, it's a resume, a flirtation, a veiled threat. Mainstream historians often forget that tulip registration was a gatekeeping mechanism. Want to gain court favor? Better hope your bloom passes the aesthetic requirements. Want a tax break? Plant something poetic. There's even record of a provincial governor receiving a direct rebuke because his tulip beds were found stylistically aggressive. Today, you're summoned again. This time, not by the High Registrar, but by the Society for the Preservation of Floral Legacy, which sounds noble, but is mostly a club for retired gardeners with powerful relatives and excessive letter-writing habits. Their headquarters is a heavily perfumed hole that smells like roses, cigars, and political inertia. The chairwoman greets, "Your Lady Halim, age 83, fingers like twigs, mind like a guillotine. We've heard," she says without preamble, "that a certain unvetted specimen has appeared." You freeze. She gestures toward her tea. "You've confirmed this." You hesitate, then nod slowly. "Does it violate the guild's standards for petal symmetry?" she asks. "Yes, absolutely." "Does it conform to any known Ottoman poetic structures?" "No, not remotely." "Then why haven't you burned it?" You blink, stammer, something about duty, curiosity, legacy. She sips her tea. Curiosity is the sin of empires. She's not wrong. Historians still argue whether the tulip era's downfall came from overspending, rising class resentment, or simple floral fatigue. Some say the obsession with aesthetic perfection created a kind of cultural paralysis born of too many poems and too few policies. You take your leave before she demands the petal. It's still in your desk drawer, beneath your ink. You pretend not to feel its weight growing daily. Back at the archive, Fatma corners you. "You haven't told me everything," she says. You offer her a dried apricot in defense. She declines. She knows you well. Knows when you're hiding something. So you tell her the basics. The bloom, the classification, the society's disapproval. She listens, arms crossed. "Do you think it's from here?" she asks. "This empire, this world." The question settles between you like a dropped shawl. You don't answer. Not out loud. Instead, you show her your notes' detailed drawings, a scent description that reads like a half-forgotten dream. And your theory: this tulip may not have bloomed from soil, but through it, like an idea manifesting. Fringe detail. You once read a forbidden folia, hidden in the top copy vaults, that described flowers as the empire's subconscious. It claims certain cultivars were born not from bulbs, but from collective desire blooms, shaped by longing, regret, or fear. The text was deemed florally blasphemous and redacted. You only remember the title, Petals of the Invisible Sultan. Fatma reads your notes, then looks at you. You know this means someone's going to try and claim it. You nod. She's right. That evening, you receive a package. No note, just a velvet-lined box containing a new tulip bulb. Smooth, dark, cold. Not the same tulip, but suspiciously similar. You don't dare that night. You dream of a garden with no sun, rows of black tulips, all swaying in a wind that sounds like your name. You wake before dawn. You're sweating ink. Final joke before rest. Sem tries to file an official request for his imaginary tulip, the velvet chicken, to be considered for codex inclusion. He even drew a picture. It has feathers. You give it a rating of deeply concerning and approve it for the joke section of the archives. A shelf labeled "Please read." You start marking the tulips file with small, subtle flourishes. A loopia stroke here, a dash of color in a margin where color shouldn't be. Not enough to raise alarms, but just enough to feel like acknowledgement, like the flower might be reading. Not just your words, but your intentions. It's a strange sensation being watched by a plant. You try to dismiss it. You sharpen your brush. You write out the phrase petal irregularity not consistent with previous specimens 5 times in slightly different phrasings just to calm down, and then someone else sees it. You're sitting at your alcove, minding your own business, when a court official you've never met before appears at your desk. His robes are crisp, his boots too shiny. He introduces himself as Etham Effendi Liaison to the Grand Vizier. He smiles too much. "I hear you've encountered an undocumented bloom," he says casually, like he's asking about a local play. You nod vaguely. "There are many undocumented blooms." "Yes," he replies, "but not many that make librarians tremble." He places a slip of parchment on your desk, an invitation, sealed in red wax with a tulip motif. Not a tulip. The petals slanted at the exact uncanny angles. You've spent weeks sketching. The seal isn't just a decoration. You open the scroll. The Grand Vizier wants to see you. Mainstream fact. During the height of the Tulip era, the Grand Vizier wielded immense cultural power, almost more than the Sultan in matters of taste, fashion, and symbolism. If the Sultan was the empire's voice, the Vizier was its inflection. Your meeting is scheduled for the next morning. You do not sleep that night. You dream again, this time not of flowers, but of ledgers that bleed ink when touched, of petals floating on airless wind, of bureaucrats with no mouths, shuffling down corridors that spiral inward forever. Morning, you arrive at the Vizier's compound, heart doing that thing it does when you're both terrified and slightly curious. You're brought into a private salon, no court, no crowd, just the Vizier, a thin man with elegant fingers and a neck that suggests long hours spent peering into secrets. He gestures for you to sit. "You've seen the bloom," he says. "It's not a question." You nod. He pours tea. "You understand, I assume, that not all flowers are botanical." You raise an eyebrow. "Some are ideological," he continues. "They bloom in policy, in culture, in silence." You sip the tea. It's unusually bitter. He reaches into a small box and places something on the table between you. Another petal, identical to yours. "Yours came first," he says, "but this one came yesterday, in Baghdad." He smiles. "We believe it's spreading." Fringe detail. Ottoman folklore speaks of a blooming plague, a story told in whispers among gardeners, flowers appearing in places untouched by human hands, spreading not by seed or root, but through thought. No one believed it. Until now. "May I ask," you say carefully, "what this spreading implies?" The Vizier's smile fades. "It implies we are not in control." You leave the meeting with a pounding head and a new assignment. Write a classified annex to the Tulip Codex, locked under imperial seal. Only a handful may read it. You're to include everything you know, especially what you feel. This is not your usual task. Feelings don't get official footnotes. You begin that night. Title the scroll. Lowly I gave the hidden tulip. The ink behaves strangely. It absorbs faster, as if the page is thirsty. You try switching parchment, inkstones, even brushes. It doesn't help. The words write themselves, almost. Your hand moves like it's being guided. You mention this to Fatma. She doesn't laugh. In fact, she begins collecting witness statements quietly, and they all say similar things. A gardener in Uskadar saw a bloom that wasn't there an hour earlier. A washerwoman near the Golden Horn claims a petal appeared on her pillow. A trader from Cairo brought a bulb that grew overnight into a flower no one dared name. Historians still argue whether this was hysteria, coincidence, or something deeper, a floral metaphor made dangerously literal. But in the archive, in your quiet corner, you start noticing something new. The older scrolls, ones untouched for decades, start curling at the edges. The designs inked along their borders, the tulips begin shifting. Not dramatically, just a degree here, a curve exaggerated there, petals thinning, colors darkening, like the tulips drawn centuries ago are changing themselves. Sam notices first. He brings you a scroll dated 1614. "Look," he whispers, "I swear this tulip wasn't leaning yesterday." You want to laugh. You really do. But you can't. Because he's right. Final joke before rest. Fatma jokes that if the tulips are watching, you should start dressing better. You wear the same robe 3 days in a row in protest. The next morning, you find a flower in your laundry pressed into your pocket. It wasn't there before. It smells like ink. The next few days are a blur of paper and paranoia. You've never been so aware of petals. You see them everywhere now. In carpet patterns, in the ornate calligraphy lining, official decree, in the shapes of oil stains on the walls. Even your dreams fold themselves around them tulips, bending inward like they're listening to your sleep. You've also never written so fast. The classified Annex Dalaliae Gabus, now 63 pages long. You've described every anomaly, every witness account, every inexplicable bloom, including a new appearance on a naval officer's hatband in Izmir. He wore it for an hour, then shaved his head and joined a Sufi order. You jot that down under potential psychological influence. Then, something stranger happens. The scroll arrives from Edern, sealed with imperial wax and labeled for the eyes of the cataloger. You open it with shaking hands. The message is short. The flower appeared in reverse. That's all it says. But the handwriting is disorienting. Not message-est. Backwards, letters reversed. The ink itself seems to run toward the edges, like it's fleeing the center of the page. You don't know what to do with it, so you place it in a drawer and label it, possibly possessed. Meanwhile, court artists begin copying your sketches. They're making prints, now woodcuts, of the impossible tulip, mass reproduced for study by the Sultan's advisors. You watch a pile of them accumulate on the scribe's desk like wanted posters. The image always looks off, somehow. Not in what it shows, but in what it leaves out. Fringe detail. Ottoman miniaturists sometimes believed they weren't illustrating reality, but revealing its hidden architecture. They painted palaces with impossible proportions, gardens with walls that didn't align, skies that touched the earth. One anonymous painter was said to see the unseen tulip behind all others. His works were banned. His final painting allegedly had no tulips, just empty space where they should have been. Fatma's gone quiet, too quiet. You find her in the furthest room of the archive, scribbling furiously. Pages surround her like fallen leaves. She's working on a theory. The flower isn't new, she says, without looking up. It's returning. You blink. From where? Not where. From when? She lays out scrolls and manuscripts like a prophet, unveiling a curse. Her evidence, repeating motifs in early court documents, sketches from old border treaties, marginalia, in banned poetry collections. They all include versions screwed or refined of that tulip. Most go unnoticed, just decorative. But some appear in alarming places. Legal rulings, execution records, birth registries. The oldest one, a border agreement between the Ottomans and the Safavids circa 1504. Right in the margin, a small black tulip with slanted petals. Not from a local source. She circles it. We've seen this before. We just didn't know we were seeing it. Mainstream fact. During the Ottoman-Safavid rivalry, both empires exchanged not just soldiers and diplomats, but symbols, art, language, even floral breeds. Some botanical hybrids were intentionally weaponized as cultural infiltration. A tulip, after all, blooms longer than a flag. You and Fatma dig deeper. You unearth references to a suppressed classification, Volume 0 of the Codex. It predates the first official catalogue, allegedly destroyed, but you find traces in supply records, ink shipments, special vellum, inexplicable expenses, labeled floral containment. The paper trail leads you to a hidden annex under the archive. Under it. Sem discovers the entrance. Accidentally, of course. He was chasing a mouse and knocked over a filing cabinet. Behind it, an old locked door with a rusted hinge and a sign. Do not index. Naturally, the stairs descend into cold stone. No torches, no candles, just a faint glow bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls like nature's margin note. At the bottom, a single room. Dust, silence, and scrolls. Hundreds of them. No labels, no order. Just stacked in low mounds, arranged like petals, themselves radiating from a central pillar. On it, a vase, empty. But you know what was in it. Fatma exhales. This was the first cataloger's vault. You find the original file. It's in worse shape than the others, like it resisted time harder. Inside, the first drawing of the tulip. Less detailed, afraid. Underneath, a note in trembling, Ottoman Turkish. I tried to classify it. It classified me instead. You copy that line into your own notes. You don't know why, but it feels important. You leave the vault in silence. Final joke before restum suggests selling copies of the Tulips sketch at the bazaar as haunted housewarming gifts. You nearly say yes, just to make some side coin. But when you print one test copy, the ink bleeds into a shape that looks suspiciously like an eye. You burn it and give Sem a strong cup of tea. The Sultan sends for you. Not a letter, not a scroll. A personal escort of guards, in robes so dark, they shimmer blue. They appear at the archive just after sunset, their boots silent on the marble floor. One of them speaks softly. His Imperial Majesty requests your counsel on the matter of the unnamed bloom. You leave your inkwell half-filled, your most recent page still drying. You'll never see it again. The journey to Topkapi Palace is quiet, but not uncomfortable. The guards don't speak, though you're convinced at least one of them is humming a lullaby. Istanbul glows in the night, a quilt of flickering lanterns and fog-slick roofs. Somewhere, a muezzin calls out not the adhan, but a private chant, like he's singing to the moon. You're ushered through a side entrance, through a hallway of tapestries depicting historical battles. But in the center of each one, now that you know where to look, there's a tulip. Some obvious, some so faint they only exist if you believe they do. The Sultan's chamber is lined with cushions and low-set oil lamps. No throng, just him, sitting cross-legged on a carpet, sipping shabrut from a crystal goblet. He's younger than you expected. His beard is trimmed into an elegant point, and his gaze is the kind that scans 10 things at once. You are the one cataloguing the impossible flower, he says. Not a question. You bow, but not too low. He gestures for you to sit. His first question: what does it want? You blink. You're a bureaucrat. You know what documents want organization. You know what officials want promotion. But what a tulip wants. You've got theories. Wild ones. Dangerous ones. Some scribbled in margins you later burned. You offer the safest answer. Recognition. The Sultan nods slowly. Then we are already too late. Mainstream fact. The later tulip-era sultans were deeply involved in garden design, seeing themselves not just as rulers of men but of aesthetics. The imperial gardens weren't just decoration, they were soft propaganda. A bloom's placement could signal favor, warning, or even war. The Sultan shows you a new bloom. Fresh, real, still moist with dew. Petals arched in the exact geometry you've been documenting for years. He holds it gently, reverently, like it could whisper secrets. This one bloomed on my pillow, he says. You laugh. You probably shouldn't have, but it slips out. He grins anyway. It smelled like ink. The flower is unlike any version you've seen. It seems to shimmer not metallic, but alive, like it's milk. The Sultan sets it on a shallow dish of water and watches it spin, very slowly. Historians will say, we imagined this, he says softly. They always do. Fringe detail. There's a suppressed theory in certain mystical texts that tulips carry memory, not botanical memory, that if a tulip blooms near you often enough, it begins to remember your face. Some say that's why the same tulip color reappears at weddings, funerals, and betrayals. The Sultan asks you to help him write a decree not for the empire, but for the flower. A treaty. You think he's joking. He's not. You've seen how it spreads, he says. It responds to classification, even craves it. Let's give it what it wants. But on our terms. So, the two of you sit there, Sultan and scribe drafting a document of unprecedented strangeness. You name the bloom, officially. Lolly-eye. Nameless. The nameless tulip. You grant it right to grow, to be recorded, to be interpreted only by imperial scribes. You include prohibitions. No replication without approval. No trading of bulbs. No discussion in public sermons. Finally, you give it a motto. Seen, not said. Historians still argue whether the document was a political metaphor, a mystic satire, or the empire's quiet surrender to something it couldn't explain. The original scroll is sealed in a gold-leaf box, placed in the palace vaults, and never opened again. At least officially. Your job doesn't end. In fact, it doubles. You're now the Tulip Chancellor, a made-up title with very real responsibilities. Your new office is in a small dome near the imperial greenhouses. It's filled with scrolls and bulbs and quiet dread. Each week, you receive a new bloom. Some arrive in silk boxes from diplomats who swear they didn't pack them. Some float down the Bosphorus and are collected by bewildered fishermen. One appears in a vizier's soup. You catalogue them all, carefully, methodically. You stop questioning their origins. Then one arrives with a name already attached. Lali-I Guzkatha Watcher Tulip. You didn't name it. Fatma didn't either. No one, did. But there it is, pressed in a folder with perfectly neat script, in your own handwriting. Dated 3 days in the future. Final joke before rest. Sem volunteers to taste one of the new tulip petals for science. He ends up sneezing purple for a week and develops an uncanny ability to hear poetry in the wind. He's thrilled. You ban tulip snacking across the Your dreams start to catalog themselves. Not metaphorically, literally. You wake up each morning with a number in your head. Dream 341, floating staircase in crimson field. Voices hum in Ottoman court cadence. Dream 342. Petals arranged like calligraphy. Each one whispers a lost lore. You start writing them down. You don't even remember choosing to do it. Fatma insists you share them. She's developed her own theory dreams. Are the tulips' real domain? It doesn't merely grow where it pleases. It grows where minds have been primed. Minds that obsess over patterns. Minds that catalog. Minds like yours. Sem has stopped joking. He rarely speaks now, but when he does, it's in verse. He claims the tulip speaks to him, not in words, but in arrangements. He shows you a pattern he drew in his sleep. 12 petals, circling a blank center. It looks suspiciously like the symbol stamped on the first codex. You make a note. Concentric design equals emergent motif. Mainstream fact. The Ottomans employed dream interpreter stabatiers, part of their palace bureaucracy. Dreams were considered semi-official intelligence, especially if recurring among high-ranking officials. Entire policies were shaped by patterns in sleep. One Grand Vizier once changed tax law after dreaming of a falcon eating roses. Your dreams are noted. The Sultan summons you again, but this time to a smaller chamber, the Moon Room. It's reserved for private revelations, or so the guards whisper. There's a water clock in the corner. It ticks in reverse. You don't ask why. The Sultan pours you tea and says, "The tulip has appeared in Venice." You nearly drop your cup. Fatma had warned about this. Once it crosses borders, it stops being Ottoman. It becomes unbound. He shows you a sketch. Same bloom. Same impossible architecture. Found on a gondola. The Italian ambassador has requested a meeting, offering a box of botanical curiosities in exchange for knowledge. Do we tell him? The Sultan asks. You hesitate, because something is shifting. The flower no longer waits to be found. It is presenting itself. Fringe detail. Some scholars of the time believed flowers had intelligence, not sentience, but intention. A tulip facing east might be praying. One curling inwards was guarding its secrets. A bloom that reappeared after being burned was called a witness. These were rarely spoken of. You suggest a delay. The Sultan agrees, but sets a new task. Prepare the flower for diplomacy. How does one do that? You assemble a committee, Fatma, Sem, and a nervous scribe named Bilil, who faints at the sight of pollen. Your mission: find a way to present the tulip without revealing too much, and without letting it do anything unexpected. Your first attempt is a preserved bloom in a sealed glass sphere. It implodes within an hour. Second attempt, an embroidered replica, woven with silk and silver thread. That one vanishes overnight. Just gone. Historians still argue whether the tulip could influence matter or merely perception. Some say it was never real. Others insist it was too real. She writes a tale of a lonely bloom that wandered gardens until it was welcomed by a wise gardener. The gardener never tried to name it, only listened. The flower stayed. The garden. You present the story to the Venetian envoy. He reads it silently, nods, and says, "We've seen the same flower." You blink. You have a name for it. He shrugs. No, but it whistles sometimes. You note that down, then cross it out, then write it again. Later, back at the archive, Fatma is waiting for you. She has a question. What happens if the tulip writes back? You don't understand. She hands you a scroll, until you touch it. Then, ink slowly words form in the script you recognize as your own. But you didn't write this. It reads, "We thank you for your service. We see you." You don't sleep that night. Final joke before rest. Sem starts referring to your team as the Floral Inquisition. He even makes badges. Fatma confiscates them all after one blooms a real petal overnight. You stop naming things. Not officially, of course. You still fill out the forms, stamp the scrolls, log every appearance of Lolly-Eye nameless. But somewhere between the dream parables and the Venetian ambassador's tulip that hummed Vivaldi when wet, the act of naming has started to feel redundant, because the tulip seems to know its own names now. Multiple. Sometimes, when you press a petal between pages, it releases a whisper. Not a sound, but a texture in your thoughts, like someone murmuring a memory into your spine. You hear different names each time, some in Turkish, some in languages you've never studied, and one in perfect bureaucratic tone. Form 37B, revision petal. You don't know whether to laugh or scream. Fatma is unconcerned. In fact, she's built a chart. It spans for entire walls of the archive, annexan, interconnected bloom of every tulip appearance, dream, transmission, language variant, and reaction. At its heart, she draws a spiral. Around it, only one word: listening. Mainstream fact. Ottoman libraries once employed scribes who specialized not in writing. Their job was to attend poetry readings, whispered confessions, even the echo-sing bathhouses. They were known as earcopiists, and some believed their scrolls carried unintended prophecies. Fatma begins to speak less and less in sentences, more in fragments, petal color memories, numeric sequences. She points to blooms and tells you what kind of day you'll have. She's right more often than not. You ask Sem if he's concerned. He's too busy trying to grow a tulip from a math equation. It doesn't bloom, but the paper he wrote the equation unfolds itself into a flower overnight. You burn it, just in case. Then unexpectedly a letter arrives from the Janissary Corps. One of their officers has requested a tulip, not for planting, for advice. Apparently, during a campaign near Belgrade, a single bloom emerged from the ashes of a razed village. The officer claims it bent toward him, not the sun, whom he's been having visions, maps, drawn in petals, orders in dreams. He wants to consult with the tulip as an intelligence asset. You ask the Sultan if this is a joke. He shakes his head. We've used worse. And so, for the first time, you authorize a classified deployment of a tulip. It's placed in a reinforced travel case, escorted by 4 guards, and issued a codey name: Echo Violet. You hate it, but it tests well on the reports. Fringe detail. During the 18th century, Ottoman intelligence services used coded flower arrangements to pass messages. A yellow tulip next to a mint sprig might mean abort. 2 violets crossed with rosewater implied proceed, but beware. These codes were known only to a few dozen agents. Echo Violet is never heard from again. Not formally, but months later, a report comes in. A single black tulip blooming on the grave of an Austrian general. Nearby a poem in Ottoman, Turkish, and you don't recognize the script, but you recognize the rhythm. It's yours. Fatma starts locking the archive doors at night. Not to keep people out, she says, to keep the questions from leaving. You nod like that makes sense, because somehow it does. Then one evening, alone in your office, you find a tulip on your chair. You didn't put it there. No one did. Vibrant, curling in a pattern you've never logged. At its base a folded note: you're doing well. Try less hard. You don't show Fatma, you don't tell Sam, you just slide it into your drawer with the others, and write exactly 6 words in your private journal. The flower has a sense of humor. You laugh until your stomach hurts, then you cry, then you go back to cataloging, because honestly, what else are you going to do? Final joke before rest. Sem creates a fake tulip profile for dating purposes. Mystical, mysterious, possibly immortal, enjoys warm sun and light rainfall. He gets 3 letters back. One from a poet, one from a gardener, and one signed simply, soon. You burn that one too. Your pen starts writing before your hand moves. The first time, you think it's fatigue. You've been logging tulip migration reports for 8 hours straight. One bloom found, tucked into the sleeve of a Quran in Aleppo. Another reportedly sprouting from a beggar's wooden leg in Damascus. You nod off at your desk, and when you wake, 3 full pages have been written. The ink is your usual mid. The margins bear your preferred spacing, but the script is subtly off. A different slant, and the words, while technically Ottoman Turkish, don't follow any grammar you recognize. You bring it to Fatma, she reads it silently, then flips it upside down. Only then does it make sense. A story in mirror. A tulip-shaped island. A blind librarian who catalogues wind. And a sultan who forgets his own name. The parable ends with a line that hits harder than you expect. Even petals know when to fall. Fatma gently slides the pages back to you. It's not a warning, she says. It's a rehearsal. You file the pages under non-canonical bloom reports. Mainstream fact. In the Ottoman court, there existed a category of writings called semi-poetic letters and documents not meant to be acted upon but merely kept for their beauty. Some were political riddles, others courtly nonsense. A few historians believe these may have hidden entire schools of encoded prophecy. That night, You sleep with a tulip under your pillow. You don't dream. In the morning, the flower is gone, but the pillow smells faintly of cardamom and rain. You're not surprised anymore. Sem has taken to wearing tulips on his lapel. Fresh ones. They never wilt. He swears he changes them daily, but you're not convinced. One morning you see him whisper to it. The flower seems to tilt in reply. Later he claims he told him a joke. You ask him to repeat it. He shakes his head. It only works in pollen. You decide not to ask again. Then the Emperor of Persia sends a letter, not to the Sultan, dear. It's written in flawless Ottoman Turkish and beginners. To the one who listens for petals. He has, apparently, heard rumors. He wants to exchange floral specimen, a diplomatic bouquet swap. Enclosed in his letter is a small bowl. It's wrapped in silver silk and smells faintly of apricots and ink. You unwrap it slowly. The bulb pulses, not visibly, not biologically. Psychologically, it pulses in your awareness, like the second before a sneeze or a memory. You carefully log its dimensions, its weight, its scent. You decide not to plant it, not yet. Fringe detail. In Persian mystical gardens, every plant had a neighbor. It could not be near. Tulips were traditionally surrounded by basil and myrtle to prevent what was called whisper bloom, an event where flowers supposedly began to emit confessional phrases at dusk. The Sultan permits the exchange. You send back a tulip of your own choosing, not the nameless one. That would be treason. Instead, a lesser cousin, still strange, still unclassified, but quiet. Weeks later, you receive a single note. In return from the Persian emperor. Your flower asked me where you sleep. You don't reply. Because, in truth, you don't know anymore. You begin finding tulips in odd places. Not just your desk or your robes, but tucked inside books you've never read. In sealed scrolls you haven't opened in years. One even falls from your sleeve during prayer. They are following you. Fatma isn't alarmed. She has found 5 in her shoes. It's like being haunted by a gentle librarian, she says. Or, Sem's tulip, now permanently affixed to his coat, begins changing color based on his mood. You ask for documentation. He just grins and offers you a petal. You decline. Historians still argue whether the tulip phenomenon was a state-controlled hallucination, a mass psychological event, or a long-forgotten experiment in botanical suggestion. Some believe the entire Tulip Codex was a fabrication. Others think it's still being written, quietly, in dreams. You start writing backward in your notebooks, not because of the mirror parables, but because it feels like the tulip understands reverse logic better than forward. When you write intentions before events, things go smoother, less weird, tulip laughter, fewer flower puddles on the floor, and one day it happens. A tulip says your name, not out loud, not even in your head, but in the shape of its bloom, in the curl of its edges, in the pattern of dew. It says your name and then opens a little wider, as if waiting. Final joke before rest. Sem declares he is going to marry his tulip if no one objects. You and Fatma throw him a mock wedding. The tulip doesn't say no. The cake is made of honeyed fig and someone's classified scroll. The guest list includes 5 empty chairs. One smells like... You begin addressing the tulip out loud. Not dramatically, not in public, just softly, in the quiet moments. I'm still not sure what you want, and sometimes, when you're especially tired, please behave today. The flower never answers. But sometimes the air shifts in response. You open it slowly. You are nearing the end of cataloging. Not because it ends, but because it begins without you. You don't speak for a full hour after that. Fatma reads it and sighs. She's not alarmed. She's satisfied. I think it's time, she says. For what? To plant the original bloom. You both return to the vault. The tulips go quiet, not gone, not invisible, just still. Where once they reached for your footsteps, curled in response to your questions, now they stand motionless. The archive feels oddly empty, though not in the physical sense, like someone important has stepped out of the room. You spend a week reviewing records. Nothing new blooms. No fresh reports arrive from the No unexpected petals tumble from scrolls. Even Sem's lapel flower refuses to change color. He calls it his floral sulk. You ask if he's worried. Not worried, he says, but I do feel left behind. Fatma stops charting entirely. I think it's done measuring us, she says. Now it's watching. Mainstream fact. Ottoman bureaucrats often believed that written records had afterlives, that each scroll or form carried a tiny fragment of its authoress essence. This was especially true for court poetry, where the calligrapher's mood could supposedly influence how the ink aged over time. You open the Tulip Codex. It smells different now. Less of pressed petals and old ink, more of anticipation. You flip through its pages, but the entries have shifted. What used to be dry descriptions, stem slightly curled, fragrant, bloom rotation. Counterclockwise. Now read like instructions, or riddles. One says, water, what has already drowned. Another, to hear it bloom, turn away. You close the book and set it gently back. Then, you check your own logs. They've changed, too. Somewhere, in the margins of your old writing, faint tulip outlines have emerged. Not drawn-grown. As if the ink itself decided to blossom, petal-shaped flourishes curling around your worst handwriting. Every mistake, every scratch-out, has a flower now. You wonder if they're judging you. Fatma proposes a theory. Maybe it was never about flowers. Maybe it was always about how we see. You nod, though you're not sure what you're agreeing with. That night, you dream again of the tulip dome. But this time, it's filled with people. Bureaucrats, poets, gardeners, a child with ink-stained hands, a woman in Janissary armor, carrying a single bulb. At the center, not one flower, but a shifting mass of blooms, thousands, all whispering. And they're whispering your name, not as a threat, not even as a command, just as an echo, a confirmation. You exist because they remember you. Fringe detail. Some early mystics believed memory was stored not in the brain, but in the breath. A flower that breathed, therefore, could remember in ways no human ever could. You wake up with pollen on your lips. You do not sneeze. In the weeks that follow, your bureaucratic duties dwindle. Fewer scrolls, less royal correspondence. Even the Sultan stops requesting flower updates. You hear he's begun talking to his own roses. No one intervenes. Why would they? Sem leaves first. He packs up with an odd calm. Says he's going north. Wants to see if tulips grow near the ice. They might be even quieter up there, he says. You ask if you're right. He holds up a petal. Only if this one starts screaming. Then, he's gone. Fatma stays a little longer. Together, you audit the archive one last time. You try to remember why you started all this. The names, the forms, the desperate need to capture each bloom before it vanished. But you can't recall the original logic anymore. It feels like a game you were once obsessed with. whose rules no longer matter. Historians still argue whether the Cataloguing project was a sincere attempt at classification or a kind of madness, an intellectual chrysalis whose true shape we were never meant to see. The codex remains, but no one agrees on how to read it. Some claim the pages rearrange when unattended. One evening Fatma comes to your chamber, holding a single bloom. It's white, unblemished, smaller than usual, smells faintly of salt and thunder. She hands it to you. Last one, she says. You place it in a small clay pot. You do not label it. You do not log it. You simply sit with it. 4 hours. It never opens. Final joke before rest. A visiting diplomat asks for a guided tour of your famous tulip archive. You show him an empty room. He nods solemnly and says, "Ah, very advanced." One morning, you wake up with dirt under your fingernails. You haven't been in the garden. You haven't been anywhere, but the earthy smell clings to your skin, and there's a smear of pollen across your bed sheets, just enough to stain, not enough to accuse. You wash your hands in silence. The tulip in the clay pot hasn't bloomed, but it hasn't withered either. It simply waits. You begin to understand something, not with your mind, not even with emotion. It settles somewhere lower, deeper, a knowing in the soles of your feet, and the way your knees ache before it rains. You understand that the flower will never bloom for you, because blooming isn't the point. You weren't meant to see the ending. You were meant to be the middle. Mainstream fact. In classical Ottoman manuscript tradition, illuminators would often leave a small flaw or imperfection in their work, an intentional deviation called nakista. Remind the viewer that only God creates perfection. A crooked petal, a missing stem, sometimes an extra flower that no one ordered. You look back through your own logbooks, and you find it. Page after page, the same signature flourish in your handwriting, a tiny curved stroke in the bottom right corner. You didn't know you were doing it. You have no memory of learning it, but every page has it, and each one forms the base of a petal. You flip the book rapidly. The corners animate, each page a part of a bloom, a flipbook of forgetting, a time-lapse of being witnessed. Fatma leaves quietly, but on the desk, she's left her final chart, just a single circle, inked in red, with your name in the center and one word beneath it. Blummed. You sit with that word a long time. Then you burn the chart. You scatter the ashes near the fountain, where the original tulip vanished. They settle in the water like loose thought. Fringe detail. In Ottoman funeral rites, tulip petals were sometimes added to burial shrouds of scribes, not for fragrance, but for silence. They were believed to suppress restless ink, preventing the dead from writing in their sleep. The Sultan stopped summoning anyone. The court no longer mentions tulips. You suspect the silence isn't denial but reverence, the kind of hush people use in the presence of something larger than myth, but smaller than God. The garden outside the archive begins to change. Slowly, unprovoked, cypress leaves adopt a faint red hue. A fig tree bears fruit in spiral patterns. A hummingbird lands beside your window and holds entirely still for an hour, watching the clay pot. You nod to it. It doesn't blink. Historians still argue whether you existed. Some records list your name with honors, titles, and dates. Others only mention the archivist, without clarity. One French traveler claims to have met you in a dream. Another swears you were a tulip all along, disguised as a man, sent to confuse botanists and emperors alike. You no longer argue. You no longer explain. You water the plant in silence. Sometimes, you read to it. Other times, you sit in a chair and breathe very slowly, until you're not sure which air was yours and which belonged to the flower. Sem sends a letter. It arrives in a block of ice. You melt it carefully, and inside is a single petal, frozen with. His message reads, "It's snowing tulips here, the quiet kind." You write back a poem. The page smells like frost and ink. You include one petal from the pot. You don't tell it goodbye. You let it decide. Then one night, you hear a noise. Not loud. Not musical, just certain. You go to the pot. The tulip has bloomed. Not fully, just a crack of color. Inside the unfurling petals is no stamen, no pisser, just a tiny scroll, impossibly small, rolled like a sigh. You lift it out with tweezers. Your hands don't shake. The scroll reads, "Your work continues in the quiet." Final joke before rest. A junior archivist finds one of your old tulip sketches and mistakes it for a diagram of a siege engine. He starts building it. It doesn't work unless you count summoning 40 stray cats as siege. You let him keep it. You name it. The scroll disappears the next morning. Not stolen, not misplaced. You simply go to reread it, and it isn't there. The tulip remains open, quiet, content. A little like it's smirking. You sit with it a long time. You say nothing, because now finally you understand. The tulip was never recording history. The tulip was the record. Every bloom, every silence, every stubborn refusal to act according to rules, each one a page you were never meant to bind. You were simply the scribe of a thing that scribes itself. Mainstream fact. Ottoman philosophers often debated whether the universe was written or spoken into being. Some claimed God's first act was not speech, meaning we're all just letters slowly remembering what word we belong to. You sweep out the archive one last time. The papers are still. The ink no longer runs. The whole room hums with a new kind of stillness. Like the breath after you've said something important. You don't turn the key when you leave. You leave the door open. Let someone else wander in. Maybe they'll see something you didn't. Maybe they'll think you were mad. Maybe they'll bloom. Fringe detail. A lost Persian travelogue describes a garden in Istanbul that sings to no one until it hears footsteps that have forgotten where they're going. The author never names the location, just ends with, "I left with pollen on my lips, and a story I could no longer tell in daylight." Sem sends a final package, a pressed tulip, flat, perfect, and entirely black. No note. You frame it. It never wilts, never fades. Sometimes it feels warm. You walk through the city now like a man who misplaced his outline. People glance at you sideways. Cats follow at a distance. One day you pass a bakery and smell petals baking into bread. You buy a loaf. It tastes like your old office. Ink, dust, and cardamom. You chew slowly. You're still cataloging. Just. ... Differently now. You no longer use quills, or scrolls, or ledgers. You use memory, you use scent. You use whatever the tulips left behind inside you. Historians still argue whether tulip consciousness is myth, metaphor, or something ancient that simply chose a more beautiful disguise than fire or stone. But late at night, when you're walking near the old fountain, and the air shifts ever so slightly, and you feel that familiar tug just behind your ribs, you know they're still here. Still watching, still remembering you. Final joke before wind down. Sam's emotional tulip oracles have become a trend in the palace. One bloom allegedly predicted a vizier's divorce. Another refused to open until someone confessed to stealing walnuts. You send him a note. "Please stop weaponizing florals," he sends back. Too late, they've unionized. And now, your feet have finally stopped walking, haven't they? The city fades behind youthing dusted ledgers. The cracked stone of the archive floor. The scent of tea cooling by an untouched window. Everything softens. Even the colors seem to retreat into pastels. The petals stop whispering, not because they're gone, but because they've said what they needed to say. You can rest now. That little clay pot on your windowsill, it doesn't need tending. It remembers you just fine. It hums when you're near. You never noticed, but it leans slightly toward your dreams. No need to speak. The air understands. Your fingers, stained faintly with old ink, twitch once as sleep settles into your bones. Maybe you're still cataloging tulips. Maybe now the tulips are cataloging you. One breath at a time, one softened thought after another. The world narrows to a flicker, a sliver of quiet wrapped in velvet dark. You're safe. The records are complete enough for tonight. The scribe can rest. The blooms will wait. And whatever else the tulip might be, archive, oracle, quiet god of color, and patience it, at last, gently closed. Good, now go ahead and sink just a little deeper under your blanket. Let your thoughts curl inward like sleepy leaves at dusk. Everything is blooming, just as it should. Sweet dreams. End of script.